The sharp scent of antiseptic, blood, and stale coffee was Dr. Eris Thorne's personal brand of Chanel No. 5. It clung to her scrubs, her hair, even the weary lines around her eyes after a brutal 36-hour shift. She moved through the fluorescent-lit labyrinth of Chicago General's emergency department with the controlled, economical grace of a predator, though her prey was always death itself. Her mind, usually a precision instrument, felt like a worn-out sponge, saturated with the last 2 days of trauma, triumph, and crushing loss. "Dr. Thorne, room 3, a harried nurse, Maya, shouted over the din, pointing a gloved hand towards a bay. "GSW to the abdomen. BP dropping." Eris didn't need to be told twice. She was already halfway there, her tired limbs forgotten. A young man, barely out of his teens, lay pale and still on the gurney, his abdomen a blooming crimson stain. The familiar urgency surged, pushing exhaustion aside. "Get me a central line kit, 2 units O-neg, cross-match for 4 more. Trauma panel, stat." Her voice, though weary, was a calm anchor in the rising storm of the ER. She worked with a focused intensity that belied her fatigue. Her fingers, nimble and exact, found the collapsed vein, inserted the catheter, and within moments, life-saving fluids were coursing into the young man. Her eyes, sharp as surgical steel, scanned for clues, for any sign of internal bleeding she might miss. This was where she thrived, in the crucible of critical moments, where knowledge and instinct danced a desperate waltz. Hours later, the young man was stabilized and wheeled up to surgery, a tenuous thread of hope woven into his prognosis. Eris allowed herself a brief, almost imperceptible sigh of relief. Another life pulled back from the brink, another quiet victory. But victories in the ER were often fleeting, and the hospital bureaucracy always loomed. Before she could even think about stripping off her blood-splattered scrubs, her pager buzzed, displaying a familiar, unwelcome extension. Mr. Davies, Risk Management. Eris felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. Mr. Davies was the hospital's meticulous, soul-crushingly pragmatic administrator. He saw patients as liabilities and doctors as rogue variables. Her last interaction with him, just yesterday, had been a tense skirmish. She had used an experimental, off-label clotting agent to save a patient with a rare bleeding disorder when standard protocols had failed. It had worked. The patient was alive and recovering, but Mr. Davies had been apoplectic. "De Thorne," his voice, dry as parchment, emanated from her office speakerphone. "A moment of your time?" Eris leaned against the doorframe, still wearing her bloodied gown. "Mr. Davies, I just finished a trauma. Can this wait?" "It pertains to protocol, doctor. Specifically, your unconventional approach to Mrs. Henderson's pulmonary embolism yesterday. The use of that experimental agent, without prior approval from the ethics committee. Or, Mr. Davies, Mrs. Henderson was coding. Standard protocol would have killed her. The agent saved her life." Eris's patience was threadbare. "And exposed the hospital to catastrophic litigation had it gone awry," Davies countered, his voice devoid of emotion. "We have protocols for a reason, Dr. Thorne. To mitigate risk, to ensure predictable outcomes, to protect the institution. Your independent judgment, while perhaps well-intentioned, creates unacceptable variables. Consider this another warning. We operate by the book here." "The book sometimes gets people killed, Mr. Davies," Eris muttered, but he had already disconnected. She slammed the phone down, the metallic click echoing in the small office. The righteous fury warred with her bone-deep exhaustion. She stared at her reflection in the darkened window, a woman pushed to her limits, fighting battles on all fronts. Finally, her shift officially over, Iris peeled off her scrubs, took a quick, scalding shower that did little to wash away the weariness, and changed into a worn denim jacket and jeans. She didn't have the energy to cook, or even to navigate the teeming city streets towards her apartment. All she wanted was a moment of peace, a quiet corner where the constant demands ceased. Stepping out of the hospital, the late afternoon sun was surprisingly warm. She decided to walk a few blocks, letting the city hum wash over her. She passed the sprawling, manicured green of Daly Plaza, a central hub often used for public events. Today, it was bustling. News vans were parked conspicuously, and a large stage had been set up, draped with UN banners. A local news report playing on a cafe's outdoor TV screen caught her eye. UN peace negotiator Mr. Julian Sorensen, set to deliver an address on global conflict resolution this afternoon, urging peace and cooperation. Iris barely registered it. She just wanted coffee. She spotted a small, independent cafe with outdoor seating, a haven of relative quiet amidst the urban sprawl. She ordered a strong black coffee and found an empty table, sinking into the chair with a profound sigh. 5 minutes, she promised herself. 5 minutes of absolute, unadulterated peace. The tranquility lasted precisely 2 minutes and 37 seconds. Iris was just raising the steaming mug to her lips, the bitter aroma a small comfort, when a sound ripped through the air, not a bang, but a concussive thump that vibrated through the very ground beneath her feet. It was immediately followed by a wave of raw, primal screams. Her trained ears registered the distinct signature of an explosion. Her coffee mug clattered to the ground. Forgotten. Her body, despite its exhaustion, was already wired, every nerve ending screaming into high alert. The placid afternoon shattered into a cacophony of fear. People around her froze for a split second, then erupted into a chaotic stampede. Tables overturned, chairs flew, and a desperate animalistic cry for survival filled the plaza. A plume of dark smoke, thick and acrid, billowed from the direction of the stage, swiftly followed by another, smaller explosion. A secondary device, perhaps, or a structural collapse. The air filled with the metallic tang of burning wiring and the chilling scent of ozone. Iris didn't run. She couldn't. Her eyes, honed by years of assessing disaster, instantly began to scan. She saw bodies on the ground, some still, some writhing. She saw shrapnel damage to nearby buildings, shattered glass raining down. Her mind, despite the horror, was already in triage mode, identifying the most critical. Through the haze of smoke and panic, her gaze locked onto the stage area. It was partially collapsed, a twisted mess of metal and fabric. She saw security personnel, disoriented, struggling to secure the perimeter or assist the wounded. And then she saw him. Mr. Julian Sorensen, the UN negotiator. He was lying awkwardly near the edge of what remained of the podium, his face ashen. A dark, rapidly expanding stain blossomed on his thigh, a crimson tide against the light fabric of his suit. Arterial bleed. Femoral artery. She knew it instantly. He was bleeding out. Security was in disarray, shouting into comms, trying to establish order where none existed. Paramedics, still miles away, were fighting traffic, their sirens wailing faintly in the distance. Sorensen didn't have minutes. He had seconds. Every fiber of Iris's being screamed at her to act. Every bureaucratic warning from Mr. Davies, every threat of legal action, vanished from her mind like dust in the wind. All that mattered was the life ebbing away before her eyes. She moved. Not a conscious decision, but an instinctual, visceral surge forward. Adrenaline flooded her system, sharpening her focus, making the chaotic scene around her fade into a blur. She ran towards the danger, pushing past fleeing bystanders, ignoring the shouts of the newly arriving police to "stay back" and "clear the area." The ground beneath her feet was littered with debris, shattered glass, twisted metal, fragments of the stage. She stumbled, caught herself, and kept going. The air grew thicker with smoke and dust, making her cough, but she pressed on, her eyes fixed on Sorensen. As she got closer, another ominous sound tore through the air, a groaning, splintering noise from above. The remaining section of the stage rigging, weakened by the blast, was giving way. A heavy metal beam, still connected by stressed wires, began to swing down directly towards Sorensen. Without a moment's hesitation, Aris launched herself forward. She reached Sorensen, dropping to her knees beside him, and with a desperate surge of strength, she twisted her body, using her own frame to shield his head and torso from the falling debris. The heavy beam slammed down, not on Sorensen, but glancing off her shoulder with brutal force. A white-hot pain lanced through her, but she barely registered it. Her focus was entirely on the man beneath her. "Sir, can you hear me?" Her voice was tight with effort, her breath ragged. Sorensen groaned, his eyes fluttering, unfocused. He was barely conscious. The arterial bleed was profuse, painting the concrete a horrifying red. Aris's medical bag, her constant companion in her hospital life, was back in her locker. She had nothing. Her eyes darted around, desperate for anything. Her gaze fell on her own denim jacket, still tied around her waist. She ripped it off, tearing the belt free. Hold on," she murmured, her hands moving with frantic precision. She quickly fashioned the belt into a makeshift tourniquet, tying it tightly above the wound on Sorensen's thigh. She pulled it as tight as she dared, hoping to stem the flow. Then, using her jacket, she wadded it up and applied direct pressure to the wound itself, pressing down with all her might, her face contorted with concentration. Her hands were covered in blood. His blood, sticky and warm. She felt the weak, thready pulse beneath her fingers, praying it wouldn't fade. Her medical training screamed at her. ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. His airway seemed clear for now, his breathing shallow but present. Circulation was the critical fight. Keep the blood inside. Keep him alive. She felt the vibrations of approaching sirens growing louder, police radios squawking. Figures in tactical gear, guns drawn, were now swarming the plaza, shouting commands. The first wave of law enforcement, FBI, and SWAT. Aris kept pressing, her shoulder throbbing with a dull ache, her entire focus narrowed to the wounded man beneath her hands. She was an island of desperate medical intervention in a sea of escalating chaos and tactical maneuvers. She heard footsteps pounding towards her, felt a shadow fall over them. "Freeze! Get down! Hands where I can see them!" A guttural shout, authoritative and angry, boomed over her. Aris looked up, momentarily disoriented, her hands still locked onto Sorensen's leg. An imposing man in a dark suit, clearly FBI, stood over her, his face a mask of furious intensity, a holstered weapon visible on his hip. He didn't see a rescuer. He saw a civilian, covered in blood, interfering with his crime scene. The man's voice was like grinding gravel. "I said get your hands off of him! Now!" Aris's head snapped up. "He's got an arterial bleed," she yelled back over the rising cacophony of sirens and shouted commands. "Femoral artery. If I let go, he'll be dead in under a minute." The FBI agent, a man with a square jaw and cold, assessing eyes, didn't seem to hear her. His name tag read Miller. He saw only a disruption, a variable he couldn't control. To him, Julian Sorensen was no longer just a man. He was the central piece of evidence in a major terrorist attack, and Eris was contaminating it. "This is a federal crime scene, lady. You are interfering with an investigation. Stand down," Miller barked, motioning for two uniformed Chicago police officers to advance. "I'm a doctor," Eris shouted, her voice raw with a mix of adrenaline and disbelief. "Chicago General ER, trauma surgeon. He needs a real tourniquet and at least 2 units of blood, right now." "Everyone's a doctor in a crisis," Miller sneered, his lip curling with disdain. He reached down, his powerful hand grabbing her arm, the one not currently pressing down on Sorensen's wound. "Get off him." "No," Iris resisted, trying to hold her position. The pain in her shoulder flared, a sharp, electric shock, but she gritted her teeth. Sorensen groaned beneath her, his skin clammy and pale. His life was literally in her hands. Just then, a team of paramedics finally broke through the police line, their gurney rattling over the debris. They were professionals, their faces grim and focused. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, immediately knelt beside Iris. "What have we got?" she asked, her voice calm and authoritative. "GSW or shrapnel to the upper thigh. Looks like the femoral artery is nicked," Iris reported, her words coming out in a clipped, professional rush. "Applied a makeshift tourniquet with a belt and have been holding direct pressure. He's in hypovolemic shock. Pulse is thready." The paramedic nodded, immediately understanding. She glanced at Agent Miller. "She's right. We need to move him now, or we lose him. What she did probably saved his life." For a moment, Eris felt a flicker of hope. Sanity. But Miller was unmoved. He saw the paramedic's assessment not as a confirmation of Eris's heroism, but as a handover of responsibility. Now that the official help had arrived, the civilian was disposable. "Fine. You're relieved," he said to Eris, his tone dismissive. The two police officers grabbed her arms more firmly this time, hauling her to her feet with an unceremonious yank. The sudden movement sent a fresh wave of agony through her shoulder. She cried out, stumbling as they pulled her away from the scene. She watched, helpless, as the paramedics took over, expertly applying a proper tourniquet and starting an IV before loading Sorensen onto the gurney. Her makeshift pressure pack, the blood-soaked denim jacket, was tossed aside by a forensics tech wearing gloves, who then carefully bagged it as evidence. They treated it with more care than they had treated her. "Hey, my shoulder. I think it was dislocated when the rigging fell," Eris said, her voice trembling slightly from the pain and the shock. One of the officers gave her a cursory glance. "You can tell it to the paramedics after we're done with you." They didn't take her to an ambulance. They marched her past the flashing lights and yellow tape, past the growing crowd of onlookers and the frantic media crews, and deposited her unceremoniously into the hard plastic back seat of a police cruiser. The door slammed shut with a final, metallic thud, sealing her in. The world outside became a silent movie of flashing red and blue lights. She sat there for what felt like an eternity. An hour passed, then another. The adrenaline wore off, leaving behind a deep, throbbing ache in her shoulder and a chilling sense of dread. She had run toward a bombing, shielded a man with her body, and used every ounce of her medical training to save his life. Her reward was to be locked in the back of a police car like a common criminal. Finally, the passenger door opened, and Agent Miller slid in, turning to face her. He held a small digital recorder. "All right, let's go over this one more time. State your name for the record. Dr. Eris Thorne. I already told your officers everything. Humor me, Miller said, his voice flat. Now, tell me why you, a civilian, felt it was necessary to run directly into an active bomb site, disregard direct orders from law enforcement, and tamper with a victim. The framing of the question was so hostile, so accusatory, it took Eris's breath away. Tamper with him? I was saving his life. That's for medical professionals to decide, Miller shot back. What were your motives for being in the plaza today, Dr. Thorne? Did you know Mr. Sorensen was going to be here? My motives? I was getting a cup of coffee, she exclaimed, her voice rising with incredulous anger. I'm a trauma surgeon. I saw a man bleeding to death. I acted. That's it. That's the whole story. Miller stared at her, his expression unreadable but deeply skeptical. A trauma surgeon. Convenient. You see a high-profile target, an international incident, and you just happen to be in the right place at the right time to become the hero? Some people would do anything for 15 minutes of fame. The accusation was so vile, so far from the truth, that Eris felt a wave of nausea. He wasn't trying to understand what happened. He was building a narrative, and in his story, she was a complication, a suspect, a fame-seeking crank who had gotten in the way. You have no idea what you're talking about, she said, her voice low and seething. Check my credentials. Call my hospital. I just finished a 36-hour shift saving people. It's what I do. It's all I do. Oh, we'll be checking, Miller said, a thin, unpleasant smile touching his lips. He clicked off the recorder. We'll be checking everything. He got out of the car, leaving her alone once more in the suffocating silence. Hours crawled by. Eventually, a different officer opened the door. You're free to go. For now, don't leave town. No apology. No thank you. Just a veiled threat. Shaking with a mixture of rage, pain, and exhaustion, Eris stepped out into the night. The plaza was now a sterile, floodlit crime scene. She found her discarded coffee mug, shattered on the pavement. A perfect metaphor for her day. All she wanted was to go home and collapse, to let the nightmare end. But it was only just beginning. The taxi ride back to her apartment was a blur of streetlights and throbbing pain. Eris's shoulder was a deep, burning fire, and every bump in the road sent jolts of agony through her body. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold, hollow feeling in her chest. She replayed the encounter with Agent Miller over and over, his sneering accusations echoing in her mind. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie where the hero is inexplicably punished. She stumbled into her apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos of the day. She dropped her keys on the small entryway table and leaned against the door, finally letting out a shuddering breath. Her gaze fell on the answering machine, its single red light blinking insistently. One message. Before she could even consider it, her cell phone, which had been on silent in her pocket, buzzed to life. The caller ID flashed a name that made her stomach clench. Hospital admin, Davies. A wave of relief washed over her. Of course. The hospital would have seen the news. They would be worried. Davies, for all his bureaucratic rigidity, would surely understand that she had upheld the highest principle of her profession. He would back her up. Mr. Davies, she answered, her voice raspy with fatigue. Dr. Thorne, you need to come in. Now. His voice was not laced with concern. It was sharp, cold, and brittle as ice. Mr. Davies, I was just involved in the bombing at the plaza. I'm exhausted. My shoulder is injured. Can this possibly wait until morning? No, it cannot, he snapped. This is a matter of extreme urgency. My office. 30 minutes. The line went dead. The cold dread returned, prickling at her skin. This wasn't a call of support. This was a summons. With a growing sense of foreboding, Aris ignored the fire in her shoulder, splashed some cold water on her face, and called another taxi. The hospital was eerily quiet at this late hour, the usual ER chaos having subsided into a low hum. The fluorescent lights of the administrative wing seemed harsher, more clinical than ever before. When she walked into Mr. Davies's office, she understood this was no simple conversation. He wasn't alone. Seated in plush chairs opposite his mahogany desk were two other figures. One was a woman in a severe pantsuit, whom Aris vaguely recognized as the hospital's chief legal counsel. The other was Dr. Marcus Finch, the chief of surgery, and until this moment, Aris's mentor. He was a man whose guidance had shaped her career, whose praise she had coveted. He refused to meet her eyes, staring intently at a spot on the carpet. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. "Dr. Thorne, thank you for coming in," Davies began, his hands steepled on the desk in front of him. He gestured to the empty chair. "Please, sit." Aris remained standing. "What's going on, Mr. Davies?" Davies sighed, a theatrical display of weary responsibility. "I've just spent the last 3 hours on the phone with the FBI, the mayor's office, and our insurance underwriters. It seems you've had a very eventful afternoon." "I saved a man's life," Aris stated plainly, looking from Davies to the lawyer, then finally to Dr. Finch, silently pleading with him to speak up, to defend her. He remained silent, his jaw tight. "What you did," Davies said, his voice dropping to a low prosecutorial tone, "was perform an unsanctioned, undocumented medical procedure on a high-profile public figure, outside of hospital grounds, and without any of the proper equipment, consent, or legal protections. You exposed yourself, and by extension this entire institution, to a level of liability that is, frankly, terrifying." Aris stared at him, dumbfounded. "Liability? He was dying. There was no time for consent forms." "There are always paramedics, Dr. Thorne. There are official channels," the lawyer interjected smoothly, her voice calm and venomous. "Your actions, however well-intentioned, could be construed as assault. If Mr. Sorensen were to suffer complications from your intervention, if he were to lose his leg, for instance, his lawyers would not see a hero. They would see a reckless civilian with a medical degree and an institution with very deep pockets." This was insane. They were talking about lawsuits and insurance while a man's life had hung in the balance. "But he's alive. He's alive because of me." "We don't know that for a fact," Davies countered, his expression unyielding. "What we do know is that your face is now associated with Chicago General. We know that an FBI agent has gone on record questioning your motives. This is a public relations nightmare." Aris finally turned her full attention to her mentor. "Marcus, are you going to say something? You taught me to act, to trust my instincts." Dr. Finch finally looked up, his eyes filled with a weary shame she had never seen before. He cleared his throat. "Aris, the board, we have to consider the big picture. The hospital's reputation, the potential legal fallout." The big picture. Not the dying man on the pavement, not the doctor who risked her own life. The institution. The money. The brand. Davies delivered the final blow. "Effective immediately, Dr. Thorne, you are placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending a full internal investigation. Your privileges are revoked. You are not to set foot in this hospital until this matter is resolved. I'll need your ID and pager." The words hung in the sterile air, clinical and devastating. She had poured her soul into this hospital, sacrificed sleep, meals, and a personal life for the sake of her patients. And in her moment of greatest need, when she should have been lauded as a hero, they were casting her out like a liability. She felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. She slowly unclipped her ID badge from the collar of her jacket and placed it on the polished surface of Davies's desk. Then she set her pager beside it. She looked at each of them in turn. The soulless administrator, the shark-like lawyer, and the cowardly mentor. "You should all be ashamed of yourselves," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with contempt. She turned and walked out of the office, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving her utterly and completely alone.